to hear.
I love fishing. Back in the early 80s, Shears Bridge Column at Tanjung was my favorite fishing ground. Me and a childhood friend used to row an inflatable dinghy from Marina Bay to the column at Tanjung. Never missed a weekend for almost 3 years, until a mechanic friend insisted to come along. That night, it was as usual. I tossed a rock into the river before entry, rowed my friend over, and followed by the mechanic. On landing, I never missed saying a prayer. Sorry, I'm here to do fishing. I never mean to disturb. It was almost 12 midnight. I think I probably landed a big grouper. My hand line was stuck and was pulling hard. Calling out, I shouted, "Chow, come over to help. The fish is pulling strong." Repeatedly, I must have called out several times. Chow was sitting, staring at me by a corner. He was stone still. He never came to my aid. The line eventually broke, probably hitting some object below. When I looked back at Chow, he was staring blankly at me, with a cold smile on his face, and he never said a word. I could sense he was not his normal self. I immediately called quits to my friend. It was around 200 hours when we reached Marina Bay. Chow never wanted to say anything. We went home. I met up with Chow the following day. "Don't ever go there for fishing again," said Chow, who never revealed what happened when asked about the fishing night. And it was also my last time fishing at Tanjung since. This happened when I was 17 years old. I'm 20 now. I'm from Bosnia and used to go fishing with my friends whenever I could. When the summer break began, we used to explore many rivers. Usually, we would encounter animals or people, but nothing special. Keep in mind that legal driving age in Bosnia is 18, so we would usually take a bus to the location or just walk to it. One night, me and my friends sat on a bus and went to a city not too far away. I won't be telling the name because it's a small country, and I've always had a phobia of someone from the internet finding me. Anyways, we arrived, and before exiting the bus, an old creepy drunk guy said something along the lines of,
"You boys going fishing?"
To which I replied, "Yes, in the lake name." He added,
"Well, good luck, and I hope you catch some fish."
with a really creepy laugh. Anyways, we arrived at the lake, which was very beautiful, and started fishing. At around 1:30, after we had some beers, we could hear arguing in the distance. One of my friends took a flashlight and shined it in the distance, and as he went over a bush, somebody clearly crouched down. As there were many of us, we weren't really scared. Me and the friend with the flashlight went to investigate it, while the others stayed near the campfire. Upon arriving to the bush, we spotted the same old drunk guy crawling in the grass. We asked him what he was doing, to which he replied he was hunting. We did not see any weapon on him whatsoever, so I proceeded to ask him, "What are you hunting without a weapon?" He got up and said,
"Look, this is a coincidence. I'm gonna get going,"
while stumbling away. We returned and tried to enjoy the rest of our night. At around 4 a.m, we heard somebody angrily shouting in the distance again. We turn around and spot this buff guy in a black shirt covered in tattoos. Behind him was the old guy.
"What do you think you're doing on my property?"
he said to us. "Sir, we are fishing and didn't know this property was yours." In the argument, I could see my friends packing the fishing rods and all the things we brought. My friends made a run for it to the forest, leaving me and another friend.
"Okay, you're gonna call your friends and tell them to come back, or else you're not leaving,"
says the buff guy. I, of course, did not want to do that, as I did nothing bad. We were quiet, just talking, doing nothing to disturb no one, and plus the river was like 300 meters away from the houses. My friend tells the man, "We're going," and starts to walk. Now, this is where it gets scary. The dude grabs my friend by the neck and again starts arguing with him. I jumped in and hit the guy in the face and started running towards the road. He lets go of my friend and chases after me. After running for about a minute, the dude gets tired. I end up exiting the trees and go onto the street. I wait on a bench for some time and see my friend coming. He sits next to me and tells me that when the dude started chasing me, the old guy jumped on him with a hunting knife. He thankfully missed my friend, and he ended up pushing the dude and running as well. We called the cops after that. A patrol came out, and we gave our statement. We called our other friends and ended meeting up with them. The cops explained to us that the part where we had been was private property. But again, the fact that the guy grabbed my friend by the neck was not how he should have reacted. We ended up going home, and nowadays, we laugh at this story. My friend's uncle loved fishing. He took it up as a hobby. Since he is around retirement age, he spent most of his time in Bedok Jetty with his khaki. That early evening he went there but was in no mood to do fishing, so he stood around looking and talking with his friends. As it was Luna's 7th month, he wanted to go home early. As he is about to leave the place, he saw an old lady holding an old-style basket walking towards the jetty. He thought it might be interesting. What would the old hag be doing here? Maybe looking for her husband or bringing him a dinner? But the old lady did not seem to care about my friend's uncle. She kept moving till she was near the end of the jetty. Then she squatted down and brought out several plates of food. Then, she stood up and stepped back a few steps. Suddenly, at the top of her voice, she shouted in Hokkien, "Come and eat, good brother and sister, uncle and auntie." Most of the old men there were startled by her action. They all turned their head and looked at her, confused. After shouting a few times, she stopped. After a while, the calm sea kinda turned rough. But what was more horrifying was what happened next. Some slimy human-like figure crawled out from the sea. It was like a body that was covered with algae and seaweed, crawling towards the old lady's food. Most of the old men there were terrified by the creature. They ran away without their fishing rods or tools. That included my friend's uncle, who was running away from it. After 1 to 2 hours, they started to go back there together to get their tools back and leave. No one dared to stay there for the night. About 10 to 12 years ago, I remember going fishing with a friend around my family's property in rural South Dakota. I was 14 or 15 at the time and had my learner's permit. We can drive earlier in South Dakota, so I took our small farm truck down to our creek with my friend. I grew up on a farm, and the creek we let our cattle drink from was full of fish. While fishing, a neighbor of mine drove by and said hi. We had some normal fishing small talk, and he asked if we would like to try fishing his creek on his property. We hadn't had much luck, so my friend and I said we would give it a shot. We followed him to his creek, and he told us we could keep whatever we caught if we wanted. He noticed we also had a 17 HMR rifle with us. We always have one in our truck in case we had predators around our livestock and such. He mentioned he had some badgers digging holes around his stock, and if we saw one, he would be alright if we got rid of it so his cattle didn't injure a leg walking to the water. We packed up our stuff and walked down the short dirt road to the creek. The creek was to the east of us and ran in the north-south direction. On the south side of the road, there was a hill formed from dirt when the stock dam was dug for his cattle, and the creek ran into the dam on the other side. We went to the mouth of the dam where the creek led in and fished for a while, noticing it was eerily quiet. Normally, there would be a lot of noise on a night like this. No wind in South Dakota means you will be hearing all sorts of bugs, frogs, etc. But there was absolutely nothing. We thought it was strange, but fished anyway. We were catching a lot of decent-sized fish. My friend was planning to stay at my house for a couple of days, so we decided we would keep a few to fry up the next day for lunch. To do this, we needed our net and stronger to keep the fish. Since it was a short walk, we left our poles where they were. There were no fish big enough to pull them in, and walked back to the truck quick. On the way back, we heard some thrashing on the other side of the hill mentioned earlier. This was odd because we were just on that side while fishing. When we reached the opposite end, we looked to see if a badger had been there, like my neighbor mentioned. There was nothing, but we could see where something had knocked down some cattails and other straw-type grass. What was weird was that way more seemed to be knocked down than what a badger could do, and none had been knocked down while we were on the other side just minutes earlier. Either way, we continued back to get our net and stringer. This time on our way back, we heard what sounded like a huge bird flapping around in the same spot as the thrashing. Keep in mind, the road from the truck to fishing spot is probably 100 feet if that. The only large birds we have in that area are vultures, hawks, eagles and owls. I've seen and heard all of these birds up close before. This sounded much larger, and the flapping was way more sporadic and quick than any of those birds moved their wings. It was eerie, and we started to get a little scared. We decided to hustle back to where we were fishing to try and see what it was. When we got there, however, again, there was nothing. We looked at each other and mentioned how weird it was, and joked that it freaked us out a little. Then, we noticed something had moved our fishing poles. The two poles had swapped places. At first, I thought my head was playing tricks, until I saw our lawn chairs. This confirmed something switched the poles because they were sitting near the foot of the opposite chairs now. This really started freaking us out, so we decided to start packing up and leave. As we were packing up, we started to hear a noise coming from the second dirt hill on the opposite side of the pond. Most ponds are dug such that there are two dirt hills on either side. There were cattails and reeds leading around the water to the other hill where the creek exited the stock dam. Now we could hear footsteps coming from the other side of the hill. We thought maybe it was my neighbor, but then we heard a combination of noises that scared the absolute hell out of us. We heard the thrashing from before, coupled with the flapping, and a new noise. This was like a growling, snarling noise, which made no sense. I've heard coyotes, foxes, badgers, opossums, and all other manner of animal I grew up with growl or snarl at some point. This sounded like none of them, and the footsteps were large and heavy, like a bipedal animal, not soft and swift like a coyote. By now, we were absolutely terrified. I grabbed the gun, and we sprinted back to the truck. It was getting dark at this point. I told my friend to drive since I had the gun. We got in, he turned the headlights on, and we could see the splashing coming from the stock dam from where the truck was parked. We wanted to try and get a better look at what was splashing around, but were too scared. My friend backed us into the road, and we sped home with me clutching the gun the whole way. I never told anyone what happened, and we have only mentioned it to each other once to this day. Does anyone have any clue what it could have been? To this day, I still get an eerie feeling when driving around the back roads near home. The day was Sunday, September 2003. Me and my father were fishing at Changi village. We've been fishing there for nearly 5 years. We fish for catfish and some other species like barramundi, snapper, and conger eel. When we reached our fishing spot, it was a hot, sunny day. Only a few anglers were there, but far away from us. We're fishing opposite Changi Chalet, where old Changi Hospital was located. At around 6:55 p.m, a time where it's reaching to dusk, I caught a palm-sized red finer mug snapper. I was happy with the catch, so was my father, and said thanks to God for the good-sized snapper. Later, at around 7:18 p.m, it was our praying time of Maghrib. Then, I went down to the sea to take my ablution for my praying. Suddenly, a strange kind of wind blew towards my direction. After taking my ablution, I take a look at the seafront and saw a woman, dressed in white, with her face bloated with water as though, like a drowning person. She was just half a body on the surface of the water. Her hair was white, and her eyes were totally sunken white. I really didn't feel scared because she was 50 meters away from me. I called my father over, and he took a look at the sea. Something was running towards us. My father was shocked, and he quickly read some of the verses from the Quran. After that, the floating ghost disappeared from the darkness. So after the incident, we prayed, safely and peacefully. Then I met with one of Changi's pro-anglers, named Sunny. I told him about the story and he said, the one you saw is called the sea ghost, or Penungu Laut. Sunny said to us, it never harms human lives. It's only looking for a raw fish to eat. That's all. Because Sunny once met with such incidents when fishing at Punggol. So I feel a bit relieved about it. But now, at present, my father and I still fish there peacefully. So those Malay legends said if you fish and caught many fish that day, you'll be facing with such an incident. I never used to believe in all those legends. Only because Changi is rich in history, that's why I believe it may be quite haunted. Yesterday I took my son fishing. He wanted to go to a nearby lake that we hadn't been to in quite some time. It's not known to be a great area. For some background, the last time we went, about a year ago, a car drove by and screamed "nice ass" at me while I stood there with my young son. This kind of garbage behavior is unfortunately expected in the area. It's also known to be a late-night hookup spot, as well as a late-night drug deal location. Due to the lake's reputation, I had made a deal with my dad that I wouldn't stay there past 4 p.m. without him. On to the story. My 12-year-old son and I, who looks much younger than he is, pulled up to our favorite fishing spot, a small pond on the opposite side of the road as the lake. Almost immediately, an older gentleman approached us, asking if there were fish in the pond. I replied that we had just gotten started, so nothing yet, but that we had caught fish in the pond on plenty of other occasions. He thanked us for the information and returned to his spot on the other side of the road. About 15 minutes later, another younger man approaches the older man with a dog. I can see and hear them chatting, but they've made no move to involve us in the conversation, which I'm glad for. I just want to enjoy a day with my son. Unfortunately, the water in the pond was incredibly low and murky, and I could tell we weren't going to have any luck. I tell my son to pack it up and we'll try another spot on the other side of the lake. As we begin packing our gear into the trunk, the younger man yells over, "Sorry if my dog and I ran you off." I tell him it's no problem, and we were simply moving to a better fishing spot. He then starts telling me how nice it is to see a mum taking her kid fishing, how you don't see that very often, etc. I get this a lot, so I'm pretty used to it. We have a short conversation about it as I pack up, and I then move towards the driver's side doors to depart. Before I can leave, the younger man starts up another conversation, this time asking me how old I think he is. This feels strange to me, but I'm nice to a fault sometimes. So I answer his question. I tell him I'm a horrible judge of age, but maybe 25? He tells me he's 38 and I'm too kind, and I laugh it off saying something like, I work with teenagers, so they always guess me well above my age just to be mean. He asks where I work, and I stupidly tell him my city. Turns out he lives there too, and starts going on and on about how he got a free apartment on such and such street because his baby mama kicked him out of their house. I think he's talking about some kind of government assistance program. Weird flex, but okay, man. At this point, I'm standing by the car door with my hand on the handle, and my son is already in the back seat. This guy can't take the hint and starts telling me about his awful baby mama and how women are supposed to be submissive, quiet, and to do what they're told. He specifically said, I mean, it's cool that you can bait and hook or whatever, but you're still a woman. Now my alarm bells are blaring. This guy struck up a conversation by commending me for doing a typically dad thing with my kid. Now he's putting me down for the same thing. He's gone from being overly friendly and complimentary to agitated and ranting. I should have been rude and just got in the car and left, but I've unfortunately been conditioned, like many women, to be polite even when we're uncomfortable. Instead, I start making comments in the hopes he'll see I'm not some meek, submissive woman who's going to agree with him. After all, I'm a tatted up chick with an eyebrow piercing and 2 lip piercings. I don't exactly look like a submissive little housewife. I guess I was trying to make him just as uncomfortable as he made me in the hopes he'd leave me alone. After he says women shouldn't be loud or opinionated, I tell him, oh well, you wouldn't like me at all. He tries to backpedal, saying, I mean, it's okay to be loud, I guess, but don't try that with your man, you know? I say, my man doesn't tell me shit. I do what I want. This kind of back and forth goes on for a while before he finally shakes his head and says, I just don't understand what kind of women would act like that. I reply, a strong one. As soon as the words left my mouth, the older gentleman yells from his spot on the bank, yeah, say that again, honey. This distracted the creep long enough for me to hop in the car and lock the doors. I still don't feel safe though. Unbeknownst to Creepazoid, only 2 of my car doors actually have functioning locks, but at least they're the 2 on his side. I put the key in the ignition and turn. No dice. Nothing. Of all the times my car to act up, it chooses now. Panic has now set in. As I repeatedly try to start my car, I can see him out of the corner of my eye. He's taken notice of my car troubles and is trying to get my attention. As he takes a few steps towards my car, the engine finally roars to life, and I peel out of there. Only then do I let my composure crumble and have a long talk with my son about what just happened. To the older gentleman, who took notice of my discomfort and provided a distraction, I'd gladly meet with you again any day. To the younger, misogynistic creep, I don't know if I was actually in any danger from you, but my gut said I was. Let's never meet again. Oh, and to my dad, I'll make you a new deal. I'm never going to that lake alone again, regardless of the time of day. A long time ago, I got really into mountain stream fishing for a while. My friend is really into it, and I started to get interested. It was pretty fun, to be honest. We went out on the day this took place, looking for a spot to fish upstream. We went to a new river and followed it up in through the woods into the mountains, searching for the perfect spot in an area which we had never been to. Felt like a true exploration. The river we checked out had been on our minds for some time, and it felt great to finally get out there. We headed out, and my friend's car had 4-wheel drive, so we felt as if going off-road wouldn't be much of an issue. It hadn't been in the past, We were on these dirt roads, which were always super bumpy, and my friend looked over to me with a guilty look on his face. He said 2 words to me: engine trouble. And I knew that we would be in for a long day. No more fishing. Our next thought was, how the hell do we get home? And how does anyone find us this far out in the middle of nowhere? We had no choice. We needed to call someone. I was thinking of asking another friend of ours or trying to call a recovery service. We decided to head back the way we came to find a spot where we could direct some help to. It was when we turned back we noticed there was a little dirt lane we must have driven past. It looked like if we headed down this road, we could find a house or something. We guessed that when we got there, we could ask to borrow their phone. Our phones were out of the signal range. As we were heading down the road, I started to wonder if houses in this area even had phones, because I didn't see many telephone lines or towers in the area. It was looking pretty unlikely, but it was worth a shot. After a while, we saw the roof of what looked to be a house up ahead. When we got closer, it looked as if there was no sign of life in the house. The situation was completely useless, and at this point, we were both very tired and irritable. When we found ourselves right in front of the house, we noticed that it was in a state of ruin. Either way, we decided to go inside the house for a bit. It was hot out, and the house might have something that could help us out. The shutters on the windows weren't locked, and when I touched one, it fell from its hinges. I looked inside and I could tell that no one was living there. It was pretty much wrecked. There were bookshelves toppled over. The stove was on its side in the kitchen. There were dirty clothes and dusty household items strewn all over the place. Thinking that it was nothing but another dead end, I was about to let my friend know, but then he called out to me, "Hey, the door's open." We headed inside. I mean, we came this far. We had to take a peek. The wood in the house looked as if it had been eaten by termites. There was a fireplace in the lounge. The floor was basically dirt in some areas too. We moved through the house and through a sliding door. Beyond that door, we saw a kind of workshop area with scattered bits and pieces of pottery lying around. We wondered if pottery makers lived here before. We saw something that looked like a kiln in there too. We went from the workshop to another room. It was the bathroom. The bath was filled with what looked like stagnant rainwater. We continued our unexpected urban exploration, and as my friend reached out for doorknob number 3, I felt an unexpected shudder race through me. I felt a dark sense of apprehension. The door opened to reveal an orderly-looking room. Nothing was smashed or decayed in this room. It was pristine. Even dust appeared to refuse to enter this room, as did the termites, spiders, and flies. It was untouched. The former residents must have used this room as the master bedroom. There was a bed and a small dining table. There was an empty teacup atop this table and an ashtray. In the ashtray was a cigarette butt. It gave us the impression that someone had just been in there. It was honestly pretty eerie. There was a little oil lamp next to the bed, and there was a magazine laid out there too. My friend went over to it and picked up the magazine. The whole time we were in that room, my friend and I were in silence. He held the magazine up and rotated it 180 degrees in my favor. All I could see from the distance was some article about a couple of missing people. My friend then appeared to be looking for something, and when he found it, he said in a quiet voice, 3 years ago this magazine was published. We both looked at one another. It looked as if they had suddenly disappeared or something. It was so disturbing to me, and I could see that from the look on my friend's face, he felt the same. Was the magazine left there on that page on purpose? We froze in place trying to figure out what had happened and why this room was free from all the destruction and decay of the others. And then almost in unison, we looked towards the closet. It was open, a tiny crack. I don't know who ran first, but before I knew it, I was racing down the stairs. My foot went through the second to last step, which caused me a great deal of pain. It didn't slow me down though, and I really didn't want to be in that house anymore. We stopped about halfway down the road to catch our breaths, and I will always remember this. My friend turned to me and said, "Something really bad must have happened in there. What kind of crazy person was living in there?" An owner of an unknown voice replied to his question before I had the chance to, and it said,
I wonder if humans lived in there.
We then resumed our running back to the car. We didn't dare talk until we were safely back behind a locked door. I've had years and years to think about what happened that day, and I have the following theory. I wonder if you will agree with me or not, or maybe you have your own theory. I think that room had been sealed. You know, like with a spell or an incantation or something like that. I think that was why I felt the chills and a sense of apprehension in me when my friend went to open the door. We let something out that day, and I don't know if it was human. And that's why we heard an unseen voice say,
I wonder if humans lived in there.
It's a pretty wild theory, I know, but hey, I cannot explain what happened in there any other way. And I have been trying to for years. Starting off with me going to my dad's house. He lives in a beautiful house with his girlfriend and her 2 kids. Me and her kid are really good friends, but her and her brother are with their dad for a month and a half, so I'll be alone for some time. But my first night here without her, I saw something funny. A shadowy figure in the hallway, downstairs, laying face down. I started to hear scratching, and when I looked down, the figure is gone. So, me being confused, I went back into my room and hid under my covers. I hear someone walking up the stairs towards my room. I'm praying it's not what I think it is. I'm praying it's just my dad checking in on me. Keep in mind, it's 4:28 a.m. The silence is the second loudest thing I can hear. My breathing is the first. Slower and slower footsteps move towards my door. My sister's room is right next to mine. I know it's not my dad anymore, so I'm now hoping it's going to my sister's room. It's not. Under my covers, I try to slow my breathing. It somewhat works. I hear my door crack open. I peek out from the covers. All the lights are on in the hallway and game room. My parents' door is open. I start slowly crying because I thought the shadow did something to them. I see the shadow. It floats into the air. I can feel it breathing above me. I close the little hole that I can see out of, and it starts breathing rapidly. Eventually, the breathing stops and my door closes. I couldn't go back to sleep until 7 a.m. Last night, I got a call from a military buddy that he was looking for a ride home from the bar and didn't want to spend $30 on an Uber ride. I said sure. I was hungover myself and figured it would help to drive with the windows down and get some fresh air. It was probably 12:30 a.m. and I was driving around my neighborhood trying to take an alternate route that I hadn't taken before but knew about. Basically, one that went through residential areas and stayed off of the bigger, more populated routes. I didn't really want to fight traffic the entire way getting downtown. So, as I'm driving, everything was normal. I was listening to some random podcast about World War II. But then, as I'm passing down this one random house a couple of streets down from mine, there's a kid standing in the front yard right on the edge of the road. To be honest, this doesn't really sound that weird. But looking back, it was past midnight and this kid was maybe 10 to 11 years old. He had on a red shirt, tan shorts and sneakers, with a blonde bowl cut. Totally normal looking kid. So, as I'm coming up to this kid, I get to a speed bump and had to slow down, so I was able to get a better look at him He wasn't playing. He wasn't running around. No other kids were with him. He was just standing completely still and meeting my gaze as I'm going past. Like, the entire way down the street, he doesn't stop staring. And after I'd passed him, I kept looking at my rearview mirror, and he still doesn't stop looking. He doesn't cross the street or go back to playing around. He just keeps standing there, staring at my truck. On the drive back, I told my friend after picking him up about the kid, and he was interested, so I took him back through the same way. The same way where I saw the kid. This time, he wasn't there. Fast forward to when me and my friend get back to my place, sitting in my living room shooting the shit, watching YouTube, and we hear this super fast, quiet knocking at the door. Like, so quiet my AC almost completely smothered the sound. It's about 1:30 AM at this point, and both my roommates are out of town for the long weekend, so I was kind of wary of answering the door. I peek out the window next to the front door and see no one there. Honestly, this could have just been a tree limb hitting the roof near the front door, but in that moment, it was like I was having a heart attack thinking that I'd see the kid there. Later, when I was in bed, laying there, I heard a few more random knocks in different places. My bedroom is right next to the front door and goes out onto the patio that the front door connects to. These knocks could have been at the front door or just in some random spots in the house. At this point, I was so tired I really didn't care to worry about it and passed out. Waking up this morning and thinking about those knocks creeped me out a bit more, but just doing a walkthrough of my front patio, nothing was out of the regular, so there's not much else to go on. I know this really isn't the most bone-chilling story, but kinda goes to show how kids can be so creepy with zero effort. My house is very haunted, mostly from my sisters always using our Ouija board. I as well am to blame for some of the paranormal experiences in our lives. I have a few ghost friends of my own. They are around my age, and there are 3 of them: Abigail, Addison, and Grace. Grace is the youngest of them all, and I don't really like her. She has red eyes and continues to knock down my things on my dresser. Abigail and Addison aren't as bad. They just scare me when they show up next to me without announcement, and I don't see them until I turn around. Their dad follows me around. I asked Abigail if she knew, and she said, "You look like his daughter that's still alive." As soon as I heard her say that, I knew he meant me no harm. These 4 ghosts aren't the main part of my story though. There's much more that I will be explained before the woman on my stairs. I started seeing ghosts at the really young age of 7. Because of how much they scared me, I would have to sleep with my mum almost every night, or at least with someone. At my dad's, I wouldn't have these problems, because anything that spawned in my mum's house stayed in my mum's house. And occasionally, a few days after my grandma had passed away, I would see her smiling at me while I was sleeping. That would scare me, but not as much as it normally would, because I had this feeling she wasn't there to hurt me in any way. Instead, she was there to protect me from the evil that comes into my mum's house. Same thing happened when my great-grandmother had passed away just a few months later of Alzheimer's. Thankfully, it was just a peaceful death while she was sleeping. I never got to meet her, which made me quite sad. My sister's cat had also died a few days before my great-grandma. I still see him walking around our house to this day, and sometimes I still cry about it because he was such a good boy. But this isn't all the ghosts in my house. My downstairs bathroom right in front of the stairs is a portal between the paranormal and the living. Many demons and angels, even fallen angels, have come through there during the night when it is most active. Sometimes when I'm having sleepovers with my friends, we will go down there and a spirit will push something off the counter, and those things will occasionally break when they get pushed. One of the spirits managed to get out of the portal line and now stays roaming my stairs, making them creak and bang at night. It sometimes even peeks over the ledge at the top to see what me and my friends are doing. This happened in my friend Dustin's house. We were hanging out in his garage. It was myself, Dustin, and 2 of our other closest friends, Brandon and Drew. The 4 of us were all gathered in Dustin's garage, simply hanging out and talking about all matter of high school problems. During the talk, Dustin had made his way to the opposite side of the garage, next to the garage door. The 3 of us hadn't noticed that this was strategic on Dustin's part. See, there was another light switch in the garage, right next to the garage door. Dustin had hatched a scheme to scare us by suddenly turning the lights out in the middle of our conversation. It was near midnight, and we were already wound up. It was guaranteed to leave us in complete darkness. However, this didn't go his way or our way either. None of us knew what was going to happen that night. So Dustin turned out the lights. It startled us at first, but we quickly realized it was Dustin trying to scare us. We asked multiple times for him to turn the lights back on. He responded with poorly acted confusion. He eventually turned them back on for us. The lights in his garage were very bright. We were blinded for a second and had to let our eyes adjust. That's when we saw it. For some strange reason, when the lights came back on, the 3 of us on the opposite side from Dustin were all facing the same way. We all faced the wall opposite the garage door. It was painted white, so it made this very noticeable to us. We saw a black handprint that was slightly faded. Just this lone handprint. Now, that may seem like it's easily explainable, which it definitely could be. However, what happened next can't be. The 3 of us mumbled to each other for a second, all asking if we remembered seeing that handprint before the lights went out. We all agreed that we hadn't. Dustin asked what was going on, and we told him we saw a black handprint. He must have thought we were joking because he didn't take us seriously at all. He turned the lights out on us again. This time, we reacted with a little more anger, telling him to turn the lights back on. He tried to joke around with us, but we weren't in a joking mood. He caught the hint and turned the lights back on. When our eyes adjusted to the light again, we saw them. Multiple black handprints, all overlapping each other in a horizontal straight line, leading from one wall to the next. Every wall in the garage now had a line of overlapping black handprints. They were surrounding us. It looked as though something or someone had been running on all 4s, horizontally around us, circling us. Dustin saw them as well. The feeling of terror and panic set in for all of us. We trampled over one another, trying to escape the garage. Drew pushed his hands and his head into my back, ramming me through the door into the house. The 3 of us spilled onto Dustin's living room floor. We couldn't catch our breath and kept shouting nonsense to each other, trying to make sense of what had just happened. We all had a hard time calming down. We tried to convince ourselves that it didn't even happen and that we only thought we had seen the handprints. However, when we mustered the courage to go check, we were greeted with the handprints still being there. The garage then became a restricted area for us when we all hung out. The only time we would go back in was to try and do our own investigating. We never cleaned the handprints off. I'm not sure if it was out of fear of angering whatever had left them, or if it was a reminder that it did happen. Either way, it is still one of the craziest experiences I've ever had, and will always stick with me. When my mum was around 15, she had lived in Germany for a few years. Her and her parents rented a 3-story old brick house, though this was a rental house which they were only going to be living in for a small amount of time. One night when my mother went to bed, she tossed and turned, unable to get to sleep for some reason. She didn't know why, but she had a horrible gut feeling. She finally decided to sit up in her bed, knowing that something was definitely wrong, though before she decides to go to her parents' room, she sees a figure standing outside of her window. The outline of a man was the only thing that can be properly made out was the fact that this man had red eyes. My mother wanted to scream for a second, but then something hit her. Her room was on the 3rd floor of the house. There was no way anyone could be standing outside her window unless they had gotten a ladder and climbed up. But the noise surely would have woken the whole house up. If not, at least she would have noticed. Something in my mother told her not to get up, and just to lay back down and pretend to be asleep, as if she didn't see anything. As much as she wanted to go running to her parents' bedroom, something deep down was sending off alarms, telling her not to. The whole night, my mum laid in her bed unable to get up, but unable to fall asleep due to pure fear overtaking her. She waited until the sun was shining before she looked back over to the window. The man was no longer there. She sighed in relief, though she was still unable to go back to sleep. So she got up and walked to her parents' bedroom, where she woke them both up and told them what happened. My grandfather, her dad, walked to my mum's room, though he didn't really believe my mum, thinking she was just having a bad dream or something. He told her it was nothing, and that no one could have been at her window since they were so far up from the ground. My mum begged my grandparents to believe her, saying she wasn't able to sleep all night nor get up to tell the two of them, though they still didn't believe her. 2 weeks go by, and my mother had only seen the man at her window 5 other times, though she felt like she was being constantly watched in the neighborhood. She kept telling her parents, though, each time they didn't believe her, saying she was just imagining it. Then, when my grandparents were visiting a next-door neighbor, my mother's so-called nightmares were brought up by my grandparents to the lady of the home. The lady went pale as a ghost the moment my grandfather described the man my mother had described to them time and time before in the last week. The lady said it was a spirit that had been around for decades, just standing outside of young girls' rooms, watching them. No one knew why or when the first time the spirit had arrived, but when it did, it never left. Most of the neighbors believed it to be an evil spirit who would prey on the young girls, and once it had its eyes on the next victim, the girl would go crazy, seeing the man everywhere they went in the neighborhood. Though it was just a rumor, this was enough to make my grandparents freak out and move out of the rental as quickly as they could, which, luckily, was extremely quick since they had just moved in and most of the boxes hadn't even been unpacked yet. This had to be one of the more creepy stories my mum had told me. Though many people wouldn't see it as too bad, my mum was terrified, even when telling the story, which she won't do often. You can tell she gets freaked out occasionally. I was reading some true stories on this sub, and I remembered that I never shared this one. It's not super elaborate or flashy, but it actually happened, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it. About a decade back, I used to work at a brewery/pub. It was set in a pretty big and old building from the early 1900s. I worked there for a couple of years, and most of the time there, it was pretty chill, but backbreaking at times. On my time working there, I had 2 experiences that I can only describe as supernatural. The first one, it was a particular late night, and I was tasked with closing up the hangar/loading docks. Closing it up was making sure there wasn't anything obstructing where the trucks would park, stacking up any loose crates, turning the lights off and locking it all up. I was about done, so I turn off the lights, and as I'm making my way to the door, a beer bottle comes rolling towards me from the dark between the tall stacks of crates. It wasn't forceful or anything, It looked like someone gently placed it on the floor and rolled it towards me. I didn't think too much of it, so I picked up the bottle and placed it inside a half-empty crate. I turned around, and as I started walking, another bottle comes rolling from the same place. Then, another one. Tired and thinking it was a co-worker trying to mess with me, I shout, "Hey, alright, you got me. Come on, I gotta close it up." I was expecting to hear laughter or something, but instead, it was dead silent. I waited for a couple of minutes, turned on my flashlight and started looking around the stacks of crates for what I thought would be a giggling co-worker. After searching each corner and turn, I gave up. I was a little weirded out at this point, but I just picked up the 2 bottles from the ground and placed them in the same crate as the first one. I turned off my flashlight and shouted at the darkness, "Alright, I'm locking up. See you tomorrow." Just as I finished saying that, a crate full of bottles fell from one of the stacks and landed 2 feet from me. Glass shards and beer exploding everywhere. The next day I told my boss about it, and he said it was probably a rat. The thing is, those crates when full probably weigh 20 pounds. How could a rat push it? Talking to my co-workers, they told me that they've also experienced weird stuff during closing hours. My second experience happened when I was closing the place. This time, I was closing the pub. When closing the pub, the last thing you usually do is restock the walk-in freezer. The freezer is probably just as old as the building itself, and it sits underground, right beneath the bar. I was down there filling that enormous thing with kegs and crates. Being a very old freezer from a time when safety wasn't a big concern, the thing doesn't open from the inside. No handle, nothing. Just a flat, plain steel door. So I did what I always did when I had to go inside the thing. I put a keg securing the door open. I was halfway through the task when I hear the door slamming shut. I rush towards the door, but it's locked shut. I start pounding on it, but the only other person there was my boss in the office, 2 floors above me, probably with his door closed. I tried my phone, but since I'm locked underground inside a steel and lead box, I had no service. I was only wearing jeans and a t-shirt, so things were getting chilly pretty quickly. My face was going numb and my hands were getting stiff. I made a blanket out of cardboard, but it was doing very little keeping the cold at bay. The only reason I didn't freeze to death was because I had a date with a regular and she went there looking for me. She asked my boss where I was, and when he couldn't find me, he went to the basement and found me inside the freezer. I was there for about 45 minutes when he found me, and I was starting to consider writing a letter to my parents and drinking myself to sleep. My boss installed a chain to keep the door open after that, but I refused to walk into that death trap ever again. Weirdest part, the keg I had holding the door open was at the other side of the room when I got out. It was a full steel keg, not something that just slides away, let alone quietly. I stopped working there shortly after, for unrelated reasons. The city had been suffocating me. The constant noise, the never-ending hustle, and the relentless pressure, they were all taking a toll on my mental health. I was just 32, but I felt decades older. So, I decided to escape to a place where silence was the loudest noise, where the pace of life was dictated by the rising and setting of the sun. I found a quaint little Airbnb in the countryside, an idyllic log cabin surrounded by acres of dense woods, far away from the maddening crowd. To be honest, it seemed like a dream. But little did I know, it was a nightmare in disguise. Upon my arrival, the cabin appeared as charming as the pictures. Rustic, isolated and peaceful. But as the sun began to set, the cabin started revealing its true colors. At first, it was the little things, the way the wooden floor creaked under my feet, even when I was standing still. The peculiar smell that lingered in the air, sweet yet metallic. The way the wind howled through the trees, almost like a mournful cry. Then, I started noticing the oddities. The mirrors in the cabin didn't reflect my image correctly. My reflection was always slightly delayed, as if it were another person, mimicking my movements. The paintings on the wall seemed to shift when I looked away, their subjects twisting into grotesque figures. As the night fell, I heard whispers, soft, eerie whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. They spoke of sorrow, of loss, and of something darker than I dared not contemplate. Then came the figure. Every night at the stroke of midnight, I could see it in the window. A silhouette standing in the woods, watching. It was always there, unmoving, just watching. Despite the terror that gripped me, I couldn't bring myself to leave. It was as if the cabin had ensnared me in its eerie charm. Every day I would tell myself, oh my God, I'm leaving tomorrow. But when tomorrow came, I found myself drawn further into the mystery of the cabin. What is this place? What secrets does it hold? Why does it not let me go? The questions consumed me, fueling my curiosity and fear in equal measure. But I was determined to uncover the truth or be consumed by it. Days turned into weeks. I found myself weirdly drawn deeper into the hypnotic rhythm of the cabin. The whispers grew louder, the figure in the woods seemed closer, and the cabin's oddities became more pronounced. One day I found a trapdoor under a worn-out rug. It led to a basement I hadn't known existed. The air was damp, filled with the scent of old earth and something else. A smell that made my stomach churn. It was the same sweet yet metallic smell I'd noticed when I first arrived. In the dim light, I could see something etched into the stone walls. Symbols, old and unfamiliar, crisscrossed the surface in a pattern that made my head spin. The same symbols were carved into a wooden pedestal at the center of the room, upon which sat an old leather-bound book. As I approached the book, the whispers grew into a cacophony. I could hear distinct words now, a chant, repeating the same phrase over and over. I couldn't understand it, but I felt a pull, a compulsion to open the book. With trembling hands, I opened it. The pages were yellowed with age, covered in the same symbols from the walls. But there, in the middle of the book, was a picture that made my blood run cold. It was the cabin, and standing by the window was a figure. The same figure I saw every night. But in the book, the figure wasn't outside the cabin. It was inside, staring directly at me. I recoiled in horror, dropping the book. The room plunged into silence. I could feel a presence behind me. I didn't want to turn around, didn't want to see what I knew was there. But I had to. I turned around and there it was, the figure. It was no longer a silhouette, but a clear, ghastly apparition. It was as if someone had taken a snapshot of despair and molded it into a humanoid shape. It reached out for me with a hand that was both there and not there. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. I was a statue, a prisoner of my own fear. The apparition's hand touched my face. It was ice cold, yet it burned. As it did, I felt a wave of emotions flood into me. Sadness, anger, fear, despair. These weren't my emotions. They were its. Suddenly, I was somewhere else. I was still in the cabin, but it was different. Alive, filled with people. I was seeing through someone else's eyes, feeling their emotions, living their memories. I was the apparition. I saw the cabin as it was, not a building, but a prison, a place of punishment for those who dared to challenge the natural order. The apparition, I realized, was not a ghost, but a prisoner, trapped in their cabin for an eternity. The memories became darker, filled with pain and sorrow. I felt every moment of the apparition's loneliness, every second of its despair. It was too much. I screamed, or at least I thought I did. The next thing I knew, I was back in the basement, the apparition gone. I left the cabin the next morning. As I walked away, I could still feel its gaze on me, but it was different. It was no longer a gaze of menace, but of gratitude. I had shared its pain, its solitude. I had given it something it hadn't had in a long time: company. As I left, I glanced back one last time. There in the window stood the figure, watching me leave. But this time, it wasn't alone. Standing next to it was another figure, a familiar one. It was me. I'd left the cabin, but part of me would always remain, trapped in the eerie solitude, forever sharing the cabin's haunting secret. Update. I've been back in the city for a few weeks now. The noise, the chaos, it's all the same. But I'm different. The cabin changed me, in ways I'm still trying to understand. Every night I dream of the cabin, of the figure in the window. But it's not a nightmare. It's almost comforting. It's a strange feeling, being connected to something so far away, so different from my own reality. About 8 years ago, my girlfriends and I would download Plenty of Fish and meet random guys to take exploring with us. Definitely not the smartest, especially since we were out in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. This one night we met a guy. Let's call him Todd. Todd was an odd guy. He seemed socially distant, and when he slid into the back of my SUV, I instantly got the feeling of regret. We were going to a place called Roney's Point, a very interesting place in West Virginia. You should look it up if you're into ghost and haunted history. Todd wanted to stay in the car for a bit to scope out the area while us girls went ahead to explore. Red flag. I was so sure he was going to try and steal my car. We went into the abandoned hospital, and out of nowhere, here comes Todd around the corner. Scared us so bad, we let out a slight scream. Tom started making comments about how his great-grandfather was a security guard at the asylum. It's right next to the hospital, and that his grandfather told him some stories about how they would shoot at the sick individuals for fun. He laughed and said,
How much fun would that be?
We continued to explore and Todd just hung out in the background. We eventually left and Todd insisted on sitting behind me in the car. I needed gas, so I started driving to the nearest gas station. Maybe 2 minutes up the winding road, I feel his slimy hands creep up and start massaging my shoulders as I'm driving. I keep leaning forward to give him the hint that I was not interested. As he is massaging my shoulders, he's telling my friends and I how stupid we are for inviting random strangers out, how we never know who's getting into our car, and how they might hurt us, etc. He started laughing again, and I will never forget the tone of his voice or the grip of his hands on my shoulders. He said,
Maybe that person's in the car with you right now.
I pulled into the gas station and demanded he get out of the car. He did, and I left him there. We got back home and my friends went on to Plenty of Fish to block him, but he already blocked her or deleted his account. We never heard from him again, but we stopped inviting random people to urban explore and ghost hunt with us. Now, this is something I really want to talk about, to be sure that everyone is cautious and stays level-headed at all times. Now for context, I live in the middle of nowhere in Canada. It was an old town that had quite a few abandoned buildings due to absence of residents. Me and many friends were tired of the lack of entertainment options for us. So what we did was explore these abandoned buildings. Prior to the experience I'm about to talk about, we never had anything too crazy happen to us. Occasionally we'd see a small bit of blood-like liquid, and we did see a pentagram on the ground from someone who went to a house previously, but nothing too bad. Until the last time I had gone exploring abandoned buildings. Now, when I was younger, I used to go to a daycare that was part mental hospital. Weird combination, I know. It closed down due to the lack of parents and lack of children at the daycare. I decided to go back there with my friends a few years ago. For context, I was 15 when this happened. Most of my friends were the same age. When we did get there, it was rather cliche. There was fog, it was rather dark, and there was a light drizzle of rain. We went to the main gate, which was padlocked shut. We decided to help each other hop over it, and made a ton of noise. We were laughing and giggling the whole time, unsuspecting of what was to come. We looked around the small playground with flashlights we had on our person. Even with our somewhat powerful flashlights, our visibility was rather limited. We decided to enter the decaying building. Glass and dirt crunched under our feet as we stepped into the daycare section of the complex. There were still old Legos, wood chips from previous furniture, old torn dolls and toys strewn about. The further we walked around the daycare section, we naturally became more and more silent, until all we could hear was the crunch of the dirt under our feet. I found some crayons in a plastic container in the corner of the room. I walked over to pick them up when, all of a sudden, we heard a loud crash coming from behind a metal door leading to the psych ward part of the building. My friends and I all looked at each other. As a whole, we were a group of 5. Most of them were very bold and cocky. We all looked at each other when my friend Brian suggested we go and look to see where the sound came from. Personally, I was not fond of the idea, but with my group of friends, there was no way anyone was going to decline such a thing. We all stacked up on the door and opened it. It was rusted to the floor, and we heaved to get it open. As we walked in, the metallic smells and must became stronger, with a hint of something else which I couldn't put my finger on at that moment. We walked in, our flashlights pointed in every direction with Brian leading the group. The hallways were tight, and to the left and right were the occasional metal doorway, some with doors open. I felt slightly claustrophobic, and it felt a little hard to breathe. As we continued, Brian shone his flashlight into a room and recoiled. We all stopped walking as Brian slowly entered the room. "What is it?" I asked him. "I thought I saw someone here. It seems all fine now." To be honest, I thought he was just messing with us to increase our anxiety. But looking back, I think he was completely honest. He backed out of the room and we continued walking deeper into the psych ward, when another friend swiftly told us to stop. We came to a halt and all listened. In the distance ahead of us, we heard the subtle pitter-patter of footsteps echo through the hallway. We all looked at each other, fear in each of our eyes. Brian continued walking towards the sounds. We considered turning back for a second without Brian, wondering if some ghost or something was in the building. But we couldn't do that to him. The closer we got, the more I felt like I was being watched. When finally we entered a room on the right, which had the smell of rotting meat. In front of us was a dead deer. Its innards were spilled all over the floor, staining the concrete. A friend of mine had a very weak stomach and vomited all over the place. That's when we heard whispering from somewhere. Brian shone his flashlight to the corner of the room where a man with short hair was standing with his head down. He wore a bright green t-shirt stained with what I assume was blood, and torn beige pants. He did not have any socks and his feet seemed damaged. He was twitching sporadically and continued to mumble even after we saw him. We stared at him for a solid 30 seconds before he made his first true movement. He looked at us with a haunting grin that sent shivers down our spine.
"You guys here for the feast?"
He said, each word with varying inflection and energy. This kicked us over the edge and we bolted out of the room, all the way back to the daycare center. The door was still open, and we decided to try and slam it shut, but the rust and pure weight of the door almost kept it open. It took 3 of us pulling with all of our strength to close it. And just before we did, I could see the silhouette of a man watching us, his white teeth being the only other human features I could see. As we sat behind the metal door, catching our breath for a second, all looking at each other for confirmation that we all saw the same thing. After a little bit of labored breathing from each of us, we heard a light tapping on the door. That's when we decided that it was time to leave. We booked it out of the vicinity completely and ran home. A year after we visited that spot, police went back to do a routine search of the area and found a man. It was stated that this guy used to go to the psych ward before it closed down. He escaped the facility he was transferred to and lived off of the wildlife around the complex. When the cops brought him in, he had a series of diseases and sicknesses from eating raw meat. His mental condition was much worse than before. There were future rumors that he did kill someone in the forest while searching for food, but nothing has been confirmed. In the end, guys, be careful, especially in dangerous areas such as abandoned buildings. This happened over 20 years ago. There was a phase my friends and I went through where we would go on dares and little nightly adventures. It was a late summer night. I went with 3 other friends and we 4 would always get up to mischief together. The dare that night was to go into a famous abandoned hospital, which was about 20 minutes away by car. Actually, I had been to this abandoned hospital 3 times before, and I wasn't all that impressed or interested in going again. I mean, there was nothing but mountains and fields as far as the eye could see, as it was in the countryside, and there were no girls there, so I was all like, what's the point, guys? But they managed to convince me that there wasn't much else to do that night and it would be fun. There are a bunch of rumors about that place. They say that it was originally a mental institution and that it was the largest abandoned hospital in all of Kanto. They say that it's cursed, and there are even rumors about a secret basement. There were plenty of rumors like these, but now I am older, I realized that I didn't ever doubt the credibility of these rumors. Unlike today, back then those rumors were spread by word of mouth, and possibly by chainmail or text messages. We didn't have the internet to rely on. My friend drove. We took flashlights. It was really dark since it was in the middle of nowhere. We walked a few minutes in the dark and the road widened a little, and then we saw the hospital. It gave off a strange presence that night. It felt different. It was a 3-story building with a rooftop. This rooftop was said to be one of the most active spots for paranormal activities. They say that something lingers there. Well, the first time I came to the hospital, I thought that it was pretty scary. But now it was the 3rd time, and nothing had happened the previous times I'd came. I wasn't really feeling creeped out or anything. It could have been because I was with 3 other guys too. We were passing through the overgrown bushes and thickets outside the hospital ground, and that was when I came up with an idea. It wasn't really a dare if we all went as a group, I said to my friends. So I said, why don't we go up to the roof one by one, and then, when you get there, call the next person up. For the other guys, it was their first time, so I was hoping to see them getting all freaked out. I thought it was a pretty decent idea. We played rock, scissors, paper to decide the order of who would go up first. I will refer to the friend who went first as A from here on out. A started off through the busted-in entrance doors, and we stood outside and watched. My 2 other friends were joking around and saying things like, why don't we just leave him here and go home? Then, we heard A shout from the rooftop. Oi! He got up there faster than I expected. He must have sprinted. I looked up at A, and there were some other silhouettes up there with him, waving down to us. Wait, there are other people here? I said aloud. As I said, the abandoned hospital had become kind of legendary, as there was still medical equipment and records scattered throughout the building. It still felt like a hospital, and at the same time it felt very abandoned. Does that make sense? I think this is why there were so many rumors. So it was popular with young people in our area as well as people from outside the area. There were some who just wanted to see it from a tourist point of view too, I guess. If you drove past on a weekend, you could always see cars parked up there and people taking photos. I'm not sure if all these people went in, but it proved to be a popular place. I said to my friend next to me, "Ah man, there's people here even on weekday nights? This ain't good, man." Then, he was called to the roof, which only left me and one other friend. Then, I heard my friends call out to my final friend.
Oi,
they shouted. I looked closer, and there seemed to be even more people up there than before. I guessed that they were making friends. There looked to be about 10 people there. It didn't seem fun if there was a whole gang of people there. It was supposed to be spooky, right? While I was thinking this, I heard my friend, who was the last to leave my company, call out to me.
oi.
Charming. Everyone on the roof seemed to be pacing around restlessly. I headed into the entrance. The walls were scrolled with graffiti. I climbed the stairs to the roof. When I got to the roof, I felt a blast of cold night air against my skin, and then I was shocked by something. I could only see my 3 friends on the roof. I felt sure I was about to be pranked, but I decided to ask the obvious question. "Guys, weren't there others up here with you?" We just looked at one another, puzzled for a while in silence. The wind blew and suddenly, we all heard a terrible voice calling.
Oi.
Someone started running and we all followed. We bolted down through the abandoned hospital through the gap in the fence. I took a look back on the roof and I swear I saw shadowy figures moving back and forth on the roof. The wind carried the dreadfully moaning "oi" sound. We scrambled into the car and hightailed it out of there. We stopped at the closest light source, which happened to be a convenience store. We never went back. I am a 28-year-old female. The story I'm about to tell you happened back in 2016 with my best friend Chris. Now, ever since the day Chris and I met, we have always got ourselves in the dumbest things ever. I mean, Chris ran away once and had my nerves all messed up. But he came back because he had no money. We were not the smartest teens, but we still enjoyed life. So one summer night, Chris and I were hanging, and we were trying to think of a place to explore like we always did. At the time, I told him I've never been to the old rock house in Greenwood, South Carolina. Now, before I get started, let me give you a little history on the rock house. A man named Thomas Payne Tolbert built a fireproof house in 1926. The fireproof house was constructed entirely from stone, concrete, glass and steel. After years of family homes burning down, Tolbert lived in the detached kitchen and used the large house to store family heirlooms. Tolbert lived his later lives in isolation. The now crumbling fortress is accessible only by foot, and no one has ever lived inside its walls. You can look up way more about the history online if you like. Now, back to my story. I've always been told the rock house has many spirits in and around it, but like I said at the time, I've never been to it. So with that said, Chris and I took my cousin's car and headed out to the old rock house. I've heard of people going in the daytime, but never heard people say they went at night. We, being dumb, went at night because why not? Ghosts and spirits never bothered me too much, being that I've seen them my whole life. Once we pull up to the woods and park on the side of the road, I get the bad feeling run all over my body. I sit there for a moment. I believe Chris sees this look on my face and asked if I still wanted to do this. Something is telling me not to get out. But at the same time, I want to see this place, even at night. "Yeah, let's go see how scary this place is," I told him. "Hell yeah, let's do it," he replied. We get out and start walking through the woods. As we are walking, we have our phones out for light, and we're making jokes, acting silly like we always do. We can never take anything seriously, no matter what. As we are walking, we don't realize how quiet it is to be in the woods, at night, in the middle of summer. We find our way to the front of the house. Chris is in front of me, and we are looking at the house. No front door and no windows. All you can see is pure darkness. For some reason, I just can't move, even though Chris is walking to what used to be the door. At this moment, I realize we are in complete darkness, and there are no sounds. No animals, no bugs, no wind or anything. Just pure silence. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I see something in the top left window. But before I completely look, I hear something to the left of me, and I look over. I see nothing, only the darkness. A feeling of dread falls over me, but nothing is there. Chris is now at the door of the house and looks inside. I look at the windows, and there it is. Something is there in the window looking down at me. My body turns cold. Those eyes. I'll never forget those eyes, burning a hole in my soul. Bright, yellow reddish eyes like fire. All of a sudden I hear Chris say, "Oh, hell no." He turns to run to me, but my body is still frozen. He grabs my wrist and pulls me to run. He never lets me go. As we are running, we are jumping over fallen trees and everything on the ground that people have left over time. As we run, we realize something is running beside us, and I don't dare to look back. My body is now in pilot mode as Chris has the grip still on my wrist pulling me. My mind is blank, and my heart is racing. At one time, I feel like I can feel the breath of whatever is chasing us. The moment we make it to the car, everything comes back to me, and I'm back in control of my mind and body. We jump in the car, and Chris goes to start the car. He has his face in the steering wheel as he tries to start the car. But it's dead. The car is dead. We start freaking out with my head buried between my legs and Chris is hiding his face. I yell out, "This is it, Chris. This is how we die. This is why people like us die in movies. Because we do dumb shit like this." Chris yells back at me, "Shut up. We're not gonna die. The car will start." I can still feel this thing outside of the car. It's just there. Is this why there's so many spirits here? Does it take the souls of people it has caught coming here? I feel it looking at us. Something wants me to look, but at the same time, a voice in my head is telling me not to. I want to cry. The car starts and Chris tries to speed off. We start going down the road, but then one of the tires blows. We are now on the side of the road again, and we just sit there, not wanting to get out. It's quiet again. The feeling of being watched is still there. Luckily for us, a guy in a truck pulls up behind us. I feel safe right now. The guy pulls over and helps Chris change the tire. I hold my phone as a light with my back to the woods. I still have that feeling. I want to turn and see what is there, but I dare not to. Something is telling me not to look. After the tire gets fixed, we head to the huddle house close by to calm down. The poor lady working that night sees something is wrong, and with what little money we have, the lady helps us pay for a meal. The next few days, strange things start happening around my house. For example, I'm in the kitchen fixing something for lunch. My roommate and I are talking like normal, and the cutting board goes flying across the kitchen. She gives me this look and says, "See what you caused?" Shit like that keeps happening for no reason, all because you wanted to visit haunted places. I pick up the cutting board. At this point, I feel like I need to make things right. I've always been told that if you disturb the dead, that you have to make things right. So with that being said, that weekend I go to see some friends who don't live too far from the rock house and tell them I need to go there. So we do. This time it's full daylight. Once we get there, I have this feeling, but I don't say a word. Once we get to the house, my friends go in to look around. They explore the place, inside and out. I look to the left of me and see nothing, but the feeling is there. My body is weak. As I walk in, I look in the direction that Chris saw something at. Then, I look into the room to the left of me and see the room is full of designs and paint all over the room. The whole house is covered the same way. But there is something about this one room. I walk into the room. There is a pentagram with all the markings around it. I walk over to it and examine it closely. I walk around it, seeing if it's done right, and my eyes see that it is. I yell out to my friends. I think someone tried to summon a demon or something. As soon as the words leave my mouth, something comes crashing down. I nope the hell out of there and just start running out of the house, sadly leaving my friends inside, not meaning to. All I do is run through the woods yelling, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I don't stop until I'm out of the woods. My friends come after me wondering what is going on, so I tell them about the other night and what just happened as well. At this point, I just want to leave. We all get into the car. The friend driving goes to start the car. It's dead, just like the other night, but in a different car. My mind goes back to the other night, and this big dark creature comes to my mind for some reason. I'd never seen it before. Was it the thing chasing us that night? Was it putting itself into my mind to scare me more? So many questions. I try my best not to freak out. I called my roommate to come pick us up. As we are waiting, a car pulls up. He must live on this road and knows something happened. He says every time someone goes to the house, their car is dead when they get back. He helps jumpstart the car, and we go down the road. I see my roommate and I jump out of the car and jump into mine. I speed off as fast as I can, wanting to get as far away from this place as possible. My friends meet me at my house, and I made a promise to myself to never go back to the rock house. For some reason, Chris and I stopped hanging out. We didn't get into a fight or anything, we just stopped being friends, and we never spoke about what happened that night until a few weeks after. We both seemed to have forgotten that night. I called him and asked him what it was that he saw that night inside the house, to make him do what he did. He doesn't remember what he saw, but he remembers that night. I thought I wouldn't forget, but I did until a few weeks ago. Someone told me that a brain will block out something so traumatizing that you won't remember what happened and live your life like normal. Maybe that's what our brains did for us, so we won't live in fear forever. I used to drive up to Malaysia quite often for short holidays. On one particular trip, I was driving to Penang along the NS highway late at night. As it was off-peak season, for most of the stretch, mine was the only car on the dark road. My wife was sleeping when we were approaching Ipoh. Out of nowhere, there was this terrible stench that seemed to envelop us right in the car. It got so bad my wife woke up and asked me what that smell was. That smell, it was like some carcass or rotting meat. So pungent, so strong. At that point we sensed something was amiss. Then I remembered an uncle who had a similar experience. Stench in the car at night, and subsequently his car broke down right beside a cemetery. It was only after he opened the window the stench went away, and his car kick-started again. Ipoh Highway is quite infamous for their own tales, so I was hoping not here, please. So I told my wife to go back to sleep while I opened the window for a bit of ventilation, but the smell lingered. The whole time all I hoped was to make it to the toll area where there would be people and lights. And thankfully, just as I approached the tolls, the smell dispersed. Just strange, inside the car with aircon on and window open, the stench can be so strong. Thankfully, nothing happened for the rest of the night. I recounted the story to my uncle. He said a spirit might have hitched a ride, and the smell was due to the rotting corpse. Nothing sinister, but still scary thinking back. This happened in a public university in Malaysia, and I cannot remember which one. This story happened in a girls' hostel block. It happened many years ago, and the freshmen were having their orientation week. One girl was allocated in a double sharing room but was living alone. She did not have a roommate. During the orientation week, the seniors warned them not to open the door if they heard someone knock on their door in the middle of the night. When the juniors probed further, they figured that it was a ghost of their deceased senior. Years before their admission, a senior of theirs had a fight with her boyfriend on the phone at midnight. Devastated, she wanted to talk to someone and began to knock on everyone's door, but since it was so late, no one answered her. She couldn't think straight and jumped off from the top floor. Ever since then, she will knock on everyone's door at the exact time of her passing. Upon hearing this, the girl was frightened and did not dare to sleep on her own. When night fell, she couldn't sleep and kept thinking about the story. The clock ticked and the time came. She heard distant knocking from one end of the corridor, starting from the first room. The knocks were being followed by a lady's voice. "Is anyone willing to talk to me?" The knocking and desperate begging grew stronger, and when it was almost the girl's room, she was really scared, so much so that she hid under her bed with a blanket. Then, it was her room. The knocks were soft. When the girl was anticipating a question, she heard, "I finally found someone to talk to." Upon hearing that, she passed out. After that, she learned that when the senior jumped, her head landed first. So, in her ghostly form, she was walking with her head on the floor and legs facing the sky. The junior girl made a mistake by hiding under the bed where her senior's ghost could see her through the door gap. This story was told to me by my uncle and aunt, who lived near Songchun Garden in Ipoh. And of course, the eerie things happened at their neighborhood. It happened a few years back. And back then, the locals were shocked with the news of a man getting shot multiple times in his own car when he was refilling petrol. Having a tarnished reputation as a member of a triad group and a loan shark, the locals thought it was enemies avenging for his evil deeds. The investigation didn't progress much, and its case is closed at present. The very car he died in was under both his nephew's and his own name. Therefore, after his death, his nephew had the right to claim the car for his own personal use. Coincidentally, his nephew stays right opposite of my uncle and aunt's house. Both of them and my cousins are dog lovers, so they had a few dogs. The night when the nephew drove the car home, which was at midnight, the dogs were disturbed by a presence, and all of them howled. Not only their dogs, but almost all dogs in the neighborhood. My aunt was alarmed, and she expressed her concern to her husband, telling him the unusual behavior of the dogs. However, my uncle brushed it off by telling her that it might be any female dog having a period, causing a high mating desire among the males. She was not sure about his reply and went off to bed. The howling lasted until the wee hours, and they had trouble sleeping. The very next morning, my aunt went over to the opposite, and they talked about how peculiar the dog's behavior was. Soon, she found out about the car and how the previous owner died from gunshots. She was terrified by the news and related the matter to my uncle. Basically, nothing they could do. The next few nights, eerie things started to happen in the neighborhood. First, a teenage girl staying not far from the nephew's home was talking on her phone with her friend when she heard a coarse male voice interrupt their conversation. The voice was very harsh and sounded pitiful. She was so scared and quickly ended the conversation. Second, a lady was preparing dinner in the kitchen when she heard a man whispering and talking at the back lane of her house. She opened her back door and found no one. Third, a lady woke up in the middle of the night and heard a man sobbing pitifully outside of her house. She decided to peek from her window upstairs, and she saw a black figure sitting under a tree outside her house and crying. And lastly, continuous barking and howling of dogs towards the car. Soon the neighbors were complaining about the strange incidents and confronted the nephew's mother. She was concerned about the car too, and decided to persuade her son to take the car to a temple for blessing, which her son gladly did. After the blessing, strange incidents ended, and the dogs stopped howling. I have an older cousin who has had the third eye ever since she was young. Lucky for us, she usually doesn't say anything in front of us if she sees something. But she has told us before, if she suddenly becomes very quiet or asked us to walk away, we must follow her instructions. My cousin used to stay in a very rural area in northern Johor, which is near Malacca, in a small village, about 20 households maximum, around 20 to 23 years ago. And I always visited her home when I was a young kid. There was a makeshift Indian shrine behind her home, near a small stream, and we always played there together with the other cousins whenever I visited them. There was this afternoon when it was about to rain at about 4 to 5 p.m, and we were playing near the shrine, when she suddenly shouted at us, "Come back now!" And she ran towards us and pulled us away and brought us home. It was only a few months later, when we had a gathering, that she told us what had happened. She said she saw an Indian ghost that was trying to play with us. We were kids playing some kids' games. The ghost seemed like it wanted to join us and disturb us. The ghost didn't look friendly and had an evil intention. Then, suddenly, an Indian god that resembled the god at the makeshift shrine appeared and subdued the ghost. That was when she shouted at us to get home immediately. Another story was told to us by my mum's close friend. She was giving birth in a private hospital in the west of Singapore about 20 years ago. There's not many private hospitals in the west. After she gave birth that night and was resting in her bed, she was woken up by someone pulling her blanket and also pulling at her arm at around 4 a.m. The thing said,
"You are sleeping in my bed. Get out."
all along, she had been praying to Guan Yin and Erlang Shen. And suddenly, she saw Erlang Shen appear and took the ghost away. How true this story is, I have no idea. Just sharing what I've heard. But for this auntie, after a few years, she went to learn from a master who said she has the life to be in this line, and founded a home temple to help others ward away evil and pray for people. She's not a medium, and she mainly does praying, feng shui, and helping people set up altars at home. Nowadays, she is big time, because some of her clients made it from rags to riches. One time, she bought my parents a new Guan Yin statue. She even said, though all are statues, there are some statues which make you feel at ease and warmth when you look at them. If you see that one, that's the one you should bring home, and she will do the necessary open light. My late grandma used to stay in a big bungalow in Malaysia. I would visit her during my school holidays and spend 2 weeks with her. I would always sleep with her in her room during my stay. I started to experience and see strange things when I was around 15 years old. Incident 1. My late grandma's house was a 3-story bungalow. She slept on the 2nd level. As she was an early sleeper, she would go to bed around 9 p.m. I do not sleep that early, and would watch TV in the living room on the first floor until about 11 p.m. This particular night at around 10 p.m, I was watching shows on TV, and suddenly I heard noises from the kitchen. The kitchen was about 200 meters away. I thought my grandma came down to drink water. However, the lights were not turned on, and I could only hear the sound of water gushing from the tap and the clinking sound when you put the cup back onto the tray. I again thought my grandma did not wish to turn on the lights and did not think too much. However, after 15 minutes, I heard noises again from the kitchen. I was a little puzzled and went to check it out. I turned on the lights and no one was there. The basin was dry, and it doesn't seem like anyone had entered the kitchen at all. Incident 2. I was watching TV again on the sofa, and this time round, I had my cousin beside me. While watching TV, I saw something coming down the staircase from level 2. It was a little boy. I couldn't see the face, as it was in dark shadow form. My cousin noticed me gazing at the staircase. She told me that they were here for some time, and they do not mean to harm. Right after she said that, I saw another 2 figures coming down and brought the child upstairs. I believed that the other 2 were the boy's father and mother. Incident 3. I was sleeping in my grandma's room and she complained that someone is pulling her leg in the middle of the night. I tried to see if there was anyone there, but just couldn't see anyone. Incident 4. It was the middle of the night, and I heard the room door open. Someone came in and went to the restroom. How I knew that she went into the restroom was that my grandma would leave the toilet room's light on. That someone came in and went into the restroom and closed the door. Then I heard water running, as if someone was showering. After about 5 minutes, that someone came out and left the room. So I was curious and went to the toilet and bathroom and checked it out. To my surprise, the basin and the floor were both dry. So who was showering in the bathroom? Georgetown in Penang, Malaysia, is a very old city. Most of the buildings downtown were built before World War II, and many, especially the school buildings, were often used to station Japanese soldiers. Many of these buildings were used as prisons and execution centers too. This school, commonly known as CIS, is an all-girls school. It is one of the oldest schools in Malaysia. It was used as a prison by the Japanese during the war. Inside one of the classrooms, there were carvings of British prisoners' names on the wall. The school also houses the first residence of Sir Francis Light, the founder of Penang. Although the school building has been declared a heritage site, some old buildings are of no value, and they were excluded from the heritage building list. One of such buildings was the canteen. Old canteen was declared unsafe and hence was torn down, and a new school canteen with a badminton hall above it was subsequently built. The badminton hall has 2 entrances, one on each end of the hall. However, only the door on the left end of the hall is usually open. The other side has a locker cum changing room, and hence the exit was not open for privacy reasons. Before one gets into the locker room, one has to go through a door, and then there is a small passageway with a surau, small mosque, on the left. There is another door before one can get to the lockers and changing area. Then there is the staircase and another door which is usually locked, as mentioned above. Some years back I used to play badminton in that hall on weekends. Personally, I have not seen a ghost or heard anything out of the ordinary. My brother, who was there with me every weekend, once said he saw a man waving at him from one of the classrooms nearby. The school has many ghost stories, but most of them, like what my brother experienced, are merely sightings of a ghost. feeling of a presence, or hearing of voices. However, there is one particular sighting which is probably one of the scariest ghost sightings I've ever come across. This story is told to me by the canteen caretaker, who was also in charge of the badminton courts. It was also told to me by my friends who were once students in that school themselves. One morning, a group of students were having their regular physical exercise session in the badminton hall. At the end of the session, all the girls went to the locker room to change. All of them left together and went back to their classroom after that. About an hour later, one of the girls realized she had lost her purse. She thought she must have left it in the changing area in the hall. Hence, she decided to go back to the locker room to look for it. She got permission from the teacher and set off for the badminton hall. When she got there, there's no longer anybody there. Being a badminton hall with dark curtains, the hall seems pretty dark without lights on. She switched on the lights and walked straight to the other end of the hall where the locker room is. When she got to the door that leads to the small passageway, she found that the door was locked. Nobody could have locked the door unless there was someone inside. Since there was no more classes in the hall, obviously someone was having some hanky-panky business inside the locker room. Eager to get her purse back and curious to what her schoolmates might be up to behind that door, she peeped through the small window in the door. She couldn't see anyone, but suddenly, out of the changing area, she saw a figure floating in the small passageway. It was kind of transparent, but yet seemed solid. Then the girl noticed something she did not want to believe. The floating object became clearer and clearer, and she noticed that it was a headless woman. Being someone who doesn't believe in ghosts, she refused to believe what she saw and decided to take a closer look through the window again. Again, she saw the same figure. This time, it became clearer, and she could see a woman in a Malay costume, floating about half a meter above the ground, without a head. The girl got so frightened that she rushed out of the hall immediately. She ran to the canteen caretaker and told her what she just saw. The canteen caretaker said she dare not go up there and investigate, but she said she believed the girl's story, and she was crying and she was completely pale due to the shock. The teacher later called her parents to take her home. This happened a few years ago when I took up a part-time job as a waiter at Genting Highland. As a waiter, I needed to work in shifts, sometimes at day and sometimes at night. Back then, I was allocated a bed at Ria apartment with my cousin, who was working with me too. We shared a big room with other workers, so basically, it was a workers' hostel. Genting is an infamous haunted place in Malaysia where many people went there for gambling, lost a huge amount of money, and committed suicide. Many sightings had been reported throughout Genting, and therefore it is very important to pray to the deities at the temple in Genting, or get yourself a Buddha amulet for protection. The place I was staying, Ria apartment, is a very dirty place. There were cases where people saw children running in the corridors, children's laughter, and heard people playing mahjong. When I first moved into the apartment with my cousin, we noticed something particular. Almost each door was guarded by an amulet, the yellow one that we always see in Hong Kong ghost movies. We knew something was spooky at that very apartment we were going to stay, but did not mention anything. Anyhow, we believed that we would be left unharmed, for we did no wrong. We were merely staying temporarily. Our stay there was normal, nothing unusual, and we did not see anything eerie, although the room we were staying in was not guarded by an amulet. Both of us were wearing Buddha amulets for protection. I almost forgot about the lurking of the unseens until one morning. That morning, I had to check in at work at 8 a.m, so as usual I woke up at 6 and got myself ready for work. When I was ready, it was only 7 a.m, and I didn't want to go to work that early, so I sat on the floor, waiting the time to pass. My room door was wide open, and from where I sat I could see the washroom's door at the far end, and the kitchen entrance, which was just opposite my room. When I was daydreaming by looking at the lamps in the kitchen, my room was pitch black. Everyone else was sleeping. There was a sudden movement on my left, and I saw a man in his 30s walking out of my room. At that moment, I thought it was only one of my roommates. I didn't see his face. His back was facing me, walking towards the kitchen. I thought to myself that he was going to the kitchen to brush his teeth. A moment later, I noticed that the toilet was empty and began thinking, why didn't he use the toilet? I kept looking at the kitchen entrance and expecting him to come out so I could say hello. I never did a formal introduction with others. After about 10 minutes, he had not come out and I couldn't hear tap water running in the kitchen. Out of curiosity, I went to check on him in the kitchen, but to my surprise, he was not in the kitchen. There was another door in the kitchen which led to the outside, but it was locked from the inside, so there was no way he could have exited the kitchen via that door. Not to mention me staring at the kitchen entrance the whole time. I made my move to the toilet and still didn't find anyone. That instance, I knew I saw something. I couldn't explain his disappearance except that he is a ghost. I hurried to take my belongings and wore my shoes to work. I still remember how scary it was to wait for the lift alone afterwards. I was afraid that he might turn up and say hello to me. However, I was lucky because I didn't see him face to face, or else I might be running high fever the next day. Okay, so I need to preface this. For years I've had dreams related to ghosts and spirits and stuff. Ever since I was a kid, it is how they talk to me. Usually, for me to make sure it's actually related and not just a weird dream, my mum taught me that it should repeat a number of times and how to look around and do things within the dream. Okay, so this particular dream is always related to a mirror in my mother-in-law's house. The mirror itself has always given me creepy vibes, and I have seen a dark shadow over it at night. But in the dream, I'm in front of this mirror. My reflection is doing things separate from me. It gives a sinister smile, and then it usually does something graphic such as slitting its throat, skin being ripped off, or other things. This has been happening for I'd say 2 or 3 weeks. I know the house was originally my husband's grandmother's and that my mother-in-law inherited. It was built in the 50s or 60s and pretty much the house is still original, save for the bathrooms being updated. The mirror itself is in the dining room, but not directly facing the door or window. But you can see some of the bathroom in it, so I'm not sure if that is the cause. When talking to my mum, she told me she thinks either the mirror is haunted or cursed, or has seen things and may be trying to show me. But my husband doesn't believe me whatsoever and says that the mirror was bought from a store. But that doesn't mean much. But I don't know. It was a Thursday night. It was around 7 p.m. My parents were not home, so I decided to have a quick bath. As I was about to enter the bathroom, I heard a strange noise from the kitchen. I decided to check it out. I slowly entered the kitchen. As I neared the kitchen, I had a premonition that it might be coming from the toilet. So, without me doing anything, I was somewhat pulled towards the toilet. I went inside and saw nothing. I decided to leave, but something made me turn and face the mirror. To my horror, I saw this hideous face in the mirror. I was so scared that I ran out of the toilet, out of the kitchen, and ran out of my house. I then heard things in my house being thrown around. After a while, I entered the house and saw many broken objects. I told my mum what happened the very next day. She brought a priest from the nearby temple. The priest said that the face in the mirror was an evil spirit that wanted to possess me, but since I ran out of the house, it got angry and broke things in the house. Luckily, the priest got rid of it. From that day onwards, I'm afraid to look into my kitchen toilet mirror. This took place back when I was 15 or 16, at the house my family used to live at. I guess I should mention that the house was right next to some woods, where unclaimed prisoners from a nearby old prison would be buried. I never had anything too crazy happen in the house, except for one time that really spooked me. Once in a while I would hear a sort of whispery woman's voice call my name, but I sort of would always just brush it off as my imagination or my mind playing tricks on me. It was a nice house, and I felt safe there, but at the same time, it was the sort of house that, if you turned off the lights by the stairs, you'd probably want to dash back up really fast. Sort of had an unsettling feeling here and there, but not all the time. At this time, my aunt was living in our basement. I was close with her. I would often sleep with her in the basement just because she liked the company down there, and we would watch movies and shows together at night a lot. This happened years ago, so I don't remember if it was daytime or evening, but the lights were dimmed in the basement because I had been napping with my aunt in her bed. I woke up and noticed my aunt was no longer in the bed next to me, so I looked up and noticed a woman standing in front of the mirror. The mirror was on the wall facing the bed, but not directly in front of the bed. The woman was brushing her hair. Her hair was long and dark. My aunt sort of has long dark hair, so I immediately thought it was her. But I almost immediately knew something was off, as the hair was a completely different texture than hers, and just had a weird feeling to it. The figure did look shadowy, but I thought it was just because the lights were dimmed. In the same moment I noticed it wasn't the same as my aunt's hair. I saw the reflection in the mirror, which really spooked me at the time. I don't know how to explain it, but the woman didn't have a face. It was sort of distorted. Then, I quickly ducked my head under the sheets, hoping I was just dreaming, and called for my aunt. She hurried over and looked back out, and nothing was there. I told my aunt what I had seen, but she assured me that I was just dreaming. However, I was so confident that I wasn't dreaming, because I was totally conscious. I could move freely and never had a waking up moment later, so I know I was awake that whole time. As the years went by, I convinced myself that that really was a dream or just my imagination, considering I never saw her again, except for the occasional hearing of the call of my name. If anyone would like to share their opinion on if I really was dreaming, that I was awake and just imagining things, or that there really was something there, please share. I'm sure this story is very underwhelming compared to most, but it's the only thing I've personally experienced. This was something I personally experienced in my old primary school. Rumor has it that the girls' toilet on the second level is haunted. It is also the only student toilet to which has a full view mirror facing the doorway. The school had a funny rule where students are to go in pairs to toilet breaks. For some reason, I never knew why. It is a very old school, and in 2000 they pulled it down. It was called BKPS. It was after PE class, where students were then required to change out of their PE attire to normal school uniform. As there were more than one class taking PE each time, the toilet was usually full, as everyone was changing out of their attire. Thus, I went to the toilet located on level 2. Now, understand this. I have used this toilet many times, as it is one of the cleanest toilets in our school. However, little did I know, that day would be my last visit there. As usual, I went into a cubicle to get changed. While changing, I heard someone from the next cubicle flushing the toilet. This was not weird, as many students use this toilet, Not paying much attention to it, I continued to mind my own business. After changing, I admired myself in the mirror for a while. That was when it happened. All the toilets started flushing one by one. I was convinced that ghosts do not appear during the daytime, so I walked towards the toilet cubicle to make sure no one was trying to be funny with me. I was maybe around 9 or 10 years old, but I was no pushover. That was when all the toilets started flushing together all at once. It was just plain creepy. I tried to rationalize the situation, thinking to myself that in some shopping centers, the toilet also auto-flushes. Thus, I turned and walked to the door. As much as I wanted to run, I told myself to keep it cool. Don't show your fear. As I was about to reach the door, it closed on me. Panicked, I knocked on the door fiercely, only to be greeted by the darkness that followed as the lights in the toilet failed me too. Helpless, I looked around for an escape route. As I looked around, I realized my reflection in the mirror was off. Remember the full-length mirror I mentioned earlier? Well, in that mirror, my reflection looked back at me. But the me in the mirror had blank eyes, like emotionless, with totally no facial expression at all. While here I am trying not to have a heart attack. It was then I saw a bright light and was pulled out of the toilet, only to see the cleaner lady giving me a disapproving look. Speaking in Mandarin, she told me, "You, I told you many times don't use this toilet, but you never listen. See what happens? If I had never come quick, maybe you would become like the girl inside the mirror. Hurry, go back to class." Although, after that incident, I tried many times to convince the cleaner lady to tell me the story of the girl in the mirror, but she rejected me many times. The only reply I'd ever get was, "Kid, don't mess with things you don't know." This is a story that I have heard from my army friend. It happens inside my army camp. So here it goes. My army camp was quite old, I suppose. Walls with paint peeling off, damaged windows, all that you can imagine. But this story about a particular barrack really turns up the eeriness. This particular barrack was an old barrack. It was just right for 10 people to sleep in. Everything was okay until something happened to a soldier. That night was a Friday night. Some of the guys were on long weekend, so they leave early, leaving those with guard duties around. In the end, only 3 guys are left inside the barrack. The 3 guys, Pete, Beng, and Tan, they watched TV and slept rather early as they had nothing better to do. However, in the midst of the night, Pete woke up and went to the toilet. It was something he saw inside the toilet that made him rush back to the barrack, awakening his buddies. "Hey Beng, Tan, wake up quick!" The other 2 guys were startled by Pete's sudden outburst. They unwillingly climbed out of bed and asked him what was wrong in the middle of the night. Something in the mirror. I saw it." Pete stumbled out his words. However, those words really make the other 2 scared. "Let's just ignore it, Pete. We'll just lock the door and go back to sleep, okay?" said Tan, being the most calm among the trio. The other 2 agreed. So they all went back to bed and prayed hard. An hour passed. Beng was sound asleep when he heard a scream. He jumped out of bed and saw Tan stood there, rooted to the ground. Beng was terrified by what he saw when he saw that Pete had hanged himself on the toggle rope on the top frame of the door, with his tongue sticking out. Both guys were almost driven insane by what they saw. Though I doubted this story, I've also heard from many people about seeing unexplainable things and heard many stories about this barrack. From what I know, this barrack is being locked, and when one peered inside, there are many talismans and paper charms posted and strewn all over the walls of this room. It sure is an eerie place to sleep. But one definitely is curious about what the other guys saw in the mirror. But I know it was the last thing that he ever saw. So my mum had this full stand mirror that my grandpa made her when she was a teen. She has had it forever basically and is super attached to it. I, on the other hand, am terrified of it and hate being near it. I often have unexplained experiences involving this mirror, like seeing things in it, dark, heavy feelings in the room that it sits in, etc. Well, recently I had a baby and he's 9 months now, crawling, learning, and all that tiring stuff that babies do. My mum lets me come over to take naps in her room while she watches my little one, which helps a lot, but her mirror is in her room. The first time I took her up on her offer, I had a dream about a little girl ghost that kept showing herself to me, then running away. I awoke all groggy and weird and felt very drained. I couldn't really explain why I was dreaming about her, or if she was real or just my imagination. I eventually just said whatever and left it at that. The second time, not much happened, other than the fact that I could not wake up. My body felt like a ton of bricks, and my limbs wouldn't follow any directions my brain sent their way. I got up at some point, but only because I could hear my son crying downstairs. This last time was the craziest of all. No dreams. I slept only an hour and a half, and everything that happened was just crazy to me. The ghostly activity actually started before I went to nap. I had taken my son upstairs to nap in his playpen, which is placed right in front of that mirror. And when I laid him down and stood up to leave, I heard whispering, but couldn't make out any words. I shrugged it off and went back downstairs. I was chilling on the couch when I started hearing whispering again. I tried ignoring it because honestly, I didn't feel threatened in any way and just kept playing around on my phone. After a while of that, I started hearing someone walking around upstairs. Not my son, as he can't walk yet and was in a playpen, so it couldn't have been him. Obviously, I was a little shaken up, but still was going to ignore it. Then I noticed this toy dinosaur thing lighting up. It has a big red button on top of its head that lights up when it's pressed. Normally it goes off for a little while after it gets pressed, but this was after my son was playing with it, and it was like it was being pressed over and over. The preset sayings would never come on all the way though. They just kept going on for like the first few words or so. I thought that was creepy, and I started to get uneasy. A little bit after that, I decided to go upstairs and take a nap as well. When I get into the room, I get that familiar feeling of uneasiness the mirror gives me, and I kinda side-glanced it, and then just tried to ignore it. My little one was asleep and safe, so I wasn't worried about him. I crawled into bed and was on my phone for a couple of more minutes when I started hearing the wordless whispers again. I ignored them again and tried falling asleep, but it felt like I was trapped between being awake and falling asleep. During that time, I heard all sorts of creaking sounds, walking, etc. At one point, it sounded like someone was rubbing their hand really fast across the blankets and sheets. Eventually, I fell asleep and, like I said, was only asleep for an hour and a half. But an hour into my nap, my brother got home. He's 11, and came upstairs because he heard my baby crying. He was quiet, barely making any noise. When he said something to my little one in a whisper, I woke up and got startled. After reassuring me that it was him and not some ghost person stalking me, he took my baby downstairs and let me rest a little longer. I set my alarm for 30 minutes and fell back asleep. But instead of my alarm waking me up, I awoke 6 minutes early. As I was opening my eyes, all I could see, all over the walls, were words. They were written very messily, and I couldn't make anything out at all. But it was all I could see for what felt like a long time, but was really only a minute or so. When I turned my phone on to check the time, the words went away, but I was definitely on edge and was shaking. I tried to take a moment to calm down, but in the vanity mirror, which was looking towards the other mirror, something shifted and flew across it. I jumped up and got the hell out of there. When I told my mum, she just laughed. And my hubby made fun of me for always getting into these crazy, ghostly situations. But I just came over to have a good time and relax, not be spooked by some crazy ghost. Anyways, I wanted to note that for the majority of the experience, I was alone with my son. It all started happening once my mum left to do some Uber Eats deliveries. And when I woke up the second time, my brother and son were downstairs playing. If you were able to listen to this whole thing, let me know what you think. Am I just crazy? I am usually known for having a highly logical and realistic approach towards life. Hence, I was against comprehending the whole ghosts, paranormal, and supernatural experiences. Ever since this occurred, I have remained silent and neutral in the whole debate, attempting to observe, read, and learn more. The room where this happened was previously used by my late grandmother, who had passed away around 6 months before this incident. It is important to visualize the room to understand the incident completely. The room was of a rectangular cross-section, with the entrance being in the smaller sided one, in one of the corners. Right in front of the entrance immediately was an antique wooden dressing room section, comprising of an old mirror and plank, and a wooden cupboard, which had mirrors attached to its doors. A double cot bed was placed right in front of these two. I like sleeping with minimal light and doors closed. I used to sleep facing the mirror on the cupboard, on the right edge of the bed. I was in a deep sleep, when suddenly, around 3:30 a.m., I woke up with my heartbeat pounding, and me sweating profusely. I was feeling feverish and weak. It was an extremely unnatural vibe. These things didn't make much sense to me. I tried to calm myself down, checked the time, and decided to go back to sleep. This whole experience was around 8 to 10 seconds. Now this is when things get extremely bizarre. Right before I closed my eyes, in that split second, I could see something in the mirror, the one attached to the cupboard right opposite me. At this moment, my heartbeat jumped up. I could feel my sweat dropping down, my mind going insane by this. As I don't believe in such things, my head exploded with questions, questioning everything. Something was hovering right above me, with its hands inside my head. It was made up of bones, with its head looking like that of an alien organism, with weird facial hair over an unnatural skull structure. The face was very disfigured, almost insect type, and it was hovering in ragged, grey-coloured clothing. I had to see it again to make myself sure that I wasn't just paranoid or insane. So after 2 to 3 seconds of panic, I open my eyes and look in the mirror, and I find it still above me, with its hands deep inside my head. It was doing something. The moment it noticed me watching in the mirror, it started moving along the edge towards the dark corner which was adjacent to the entrance. Now, I turn to my left and see there's nothing. I turn to the cupboard mirror and I see it hovering away. Turn back to the left, there's nothing. Turn to the dressing table mirror again. I could clearly see it hovering towards the center of the room, while I couldn't see the same when I turned my head. By this point, I was shell-shocked, goosebumps all over, in a complete state of panic and paranoia, moving my head from left to straight repeatedly as I watched it hover to the corner of the room and then vanish into thin air. At this point, I couldn't control or calm myself as I attempted to go about it with logic. It just didn't make any sense. I saw that thing clearly in the mirrors, while I didn't see anything outside of it. I turned on the lights and just stayed up, Googling about such experiences, trying to get myself out of panic and shock. It took me weeks to get myself sleeping normally. I hadn't faced any such experiences before this, and since then. I am open to any sort of explanations to answer my experience, as I couldn't find any solid concluding answer in my research.